January 6, 1932. Ravinia, Illinois, 30 kilometers north of Chicago. 3:30 in the afternoon. In the bedroom on the second floor of the estate, which the owner himself simply called home, the breathing of 70-year-old Julius Rosenwald stops. The doctor records the time of death. 5 children and closest relatives are in the room. Deep snow lies outside the window, covering several acres of land, but there is nothing in this scene of the grandeur of a monarch's passing. No golden candelabras, no crowd of mourners, no priests reading prayers over the body of one of the richest people on the planet. At this moment, the fortune of the man lying on the bed is estimated by experts, but an exact figure cannot be named due to the ongoing financial chaos of the Great Depression. 3 years earlier, before Black Tuesday, his capital exceeded $200 million, which in today's terms amounts to more than $3.5 billion. He was the chairman of the board of directors of Sears-Roebuck and Company, a corporation that was essentially the Amazon of the early 20th century. He was the man who taught America to consume. But at the moment of death, his personal accounts were rapidly emptying. This was not bankruptcy. This was a plan. 10 years before this quiet death, in 1922, a heavy freight train arrived at the railway station in the town of Benson, North Carolina. 2 boxcars were packed to capacity. The manifests listed a single item, Model 289. The cargo weighed 45 tons. Inside were 30,000 parts. 10,000 yellow pine boards, 750 pounds of nails, 27 gallons of paint, window frames, doors, shingles, and a detailed 75-page instruction manual. This was Magnolia. The most expensive, most luxurious, and most ambitious house ever sold by Sears. In the 1918 Modern Homes catalog, this mansion occupied the center spread. The price was $5,972, an amount that at the time could buy 3 ordinary houses or 5 cars. Magnolia was an architectural copy of the historic mansion of poet Henry Longfellow in Cambridge. A 2-story portico with Ionic columns, a grand oak staircase, French doors, a solarium, a servant's room, a library. It was a palace that could be ordered by mail, simply by checking a box on the order form and sending a check to Chicago. For millions of Americans, this house became a symbol of ultimate success. If you could afford Magnolia, you were no longer a farmer or a worker. You became an aristocrat of the new era. The paradox was that the man who created this system, the man who made all of America dream of columns and oak staircases, now lay dead in a house that architectural critics called strangely modest for a titan of such scale. Julius Rosenwald never lived in Magnolia. Moreover, he spent the last 20 years of his life systematically destroying his own wealth by investing it in projects that brought not a cent of profit. At the moment of his death, Chicago newspapers were preparing obituaries, trying to comprehend the scale of the figure. Journalists wrote about how he turned Sears into a global empire. They calculated the company's revenue, which in 1929 reached $443 million. But they missed the main detail. Rosenwald's will contained a mechanism that was utterly alien to the logic of capitalism of that time. He ordered his charitable foundation to spend all the funds down to the last cent and self-liquidate within 25 years after his death. Usually, magnates build mausoleums, libraries named after themselves, universities with golden letters on the facades. Rockefellers, Carnegies, Vanderbilts, all of them sought immortality through stone and concrete. Rosenwald chose a different strategy. He decided that his money should work here and now, rather than being preserved in endowments. He looked at Magnolia, the pinnacle of consumer dreams, and saw in it only a temporary shelter. True building, in his opinion, should come not from pine and brick, but from human potential. On January 6, 1932, while Rosenwald's body was cooling thousands of kilometers from Illinois, in the remote forests of Alabama and Mississippi, other buildings stood. There were more than 5,000 of them. These were not palaces with columns. These were simple wooden structures raised on brick pilings to protect the floor from rot. They had huge windows positioned to catch every ray of sunlight because there was no electricity inside. These buildings were not listed in Sears catalogs. They could not be bought by mail. But it was they, not the luxurious magnolias, that became the main project of the life of the man who had just died. The story we are about to tell is not just a biography of a businessman. It is a chronicle of one of the most radical social experiments in the history of the United States. It is an investigation into how the son of a Jewish immigrant who sold men's suits used the mechanisms of wild capitalism to hack the system of racial segregation. We will trace the path from the glossy pages of the Sears catalog, promising paradise for $5,000, to the muddy dirt roads of the South, where they could burn you alive for building a school. In the next few minutes, you will see how an empire based on trust was created and how it was used to save an entire generation. You will learn why only a few of the 7 sold Magnolia mansions have survived to this day, while the modest shacks, built with Rosenwald's money, produced an elite that changed the US Constitution. But to understand the finale, we need to go back to the beginning. To a world where the name Rosenwald meant nothing yet, and the Sears Company was on the brink of bankruptcy. August 12, 1862, Springfield, Illinois. In a house located just a few blocks from Abraham Lincoln's residence, Julius Rosenwald is born. The Civil War rages outside the windows. Lincoln is already in Washington, signing decrees that will tear the country apart to put it back together. This neighborhood is not just a geographical fact. Lincoln's shadow and the idea of emancipation will become the foundation on which Rosenwald will build his empire. Though at that moment, no one could have imagined that the son of a Jewish immigrant from Germany would become a financial titan. His father, Samuel Rosenwald, started as a peddler, an itinerant trader walking from farm to farm with goods on his back. This was a school of humiliation and survival. Julius learned the first lesson of capitalism even before he learned to read. Trust is a currency worth more than gold. But to convert trust into millions, scale was needed. By 1890, Julius was no longer the son of a peddler, but a successful manufacturer of men's clothing in Chicago. His firm, Rosenwald & Weil, sews suits, but one client stands out from the rest. It is a strange, chaotic outfit called Sears-Roebuck & Company. They order thousands of suits, but constantly delay payment. Richard Sears, the company's founder, was a marketing genius. He could sell sand in the desert by writing ad copy that took the breath away from Iowa farmers. But as an administrator, he was a disaster. The Sears warehouses in Chicago resembled a battlefield after defeat. Orders were lost, money disappeared, customers received farm implements instead of furniture. The office was in such chaos that employees simply burned sacks of complaint letters to avoid dealing with them. The company was choking on its own growth. It needed money and order. In August 1895, an event occurs that changes the history of American commerce. Julius Rosenwald makes a decision that many considered madness. He buys half a share in the Sears Company for $37,500. In today's terms, that's about $1.5 million. He enters the burning building not as a firefighter, but as an architect. Rosenwald did not start writing ad slogans. He focused on mechanics. He introduced a system that seemed like science fiction at the time. It was called the scheduling system. Each order was assigned an exact assembly time. If an order was to be assembled at 2:10 p.m., all goods, from violins to plows, had to arrive at the assembly shop exactly at that moment. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. He turned chaos into Swiss watches. He installed pneumatic tube mail that whistled as it carried manifests between floors of the gigantic 300,000 square meter warehouse. But Rosenwald's main invention was not logistics, but philosophy. He introduced the principle, satisfaction guaranteed or we will refund your money. Today it sounds banal. At the end of the 19th century, it was a revolution. A buyer living 1,000 kilometers from Chicago sent money to strangers, risking everything. Rosenwald said, "I take the risk." This destroyed the barrier of fear. The result was stunning. Sales soared from $750,000 in 1895 to $50 million by 1907. In 1906, Rosenwald conducts the first major IPO in the history of American retail trade. The deal is organized by Henry Goldman of Goldman Sachs. Sears shares begin trading on the exchange, and Julius Rosenwald wakes up a multimillionaire. Here begins the internal conflict that will determine the fate of Magnolia and thousands of schools. Rosenwald, being a man of strict logic, looks at his accounts and sees numbers there that defy rational explanation. He works a lot, but not 1,000 times more than his employees. He is smart, but does not consider himself a genius. He comes to a conclusion that frightens other rich people of that time. His wealth is the result of luck and circumstances, not divine election. Don't confuse genius with a bull market, he will say one day. This realization gives birth in him to a feeling of deep discomfort. While his partners build castles and buy yachts, Rosenwald begins to look for a way to correct this system error. He sees America not from the window of a limousine, but through millions of letters coming to Sears. He sees a country divided into two worlds: the white world, where there is access to credit and education, and the black world, where poverty and lawlessness reign. For Rosenwald, this is not a question of pity. This is a question of inefficiency. A huge part of the country's population is excluded from the economy. They cannot be good Sears customers because they have no money. They have no money because they have no education. The circle is closed. And Julius Rosenwald, the man who fixed Sears' logistics, decides to fix the logistics of American society. But he needs a partner, a person who knows the problem from the inside, and fate prepares for him a meeting that will become as pivotal a moment as the purchase of a share in Sears. In 1911, the most famous African-American of that era arrives in Chicago. His name is Booker Taliaferro Washington, and he has a plan. May 18, 1911, Chicago, the Blackstone Hotel on Michigan Avenue. This building is called the Hotel of Presidents, where those who shape the fates of the world stay. In the lobby, decorated with mahogany and marble, a man enters whose very presence here is a challenge to societal norms. Booker Taliaferro Washington, a 50-year-old educator born into slavery, ascends in the elevator to the suite where Julius Rosenwald awaits him. This is not just a polite visit. This is a clash of two worlds that in early 20th century America should not have intersected. On one side is the Jewish capitalist, son of an immigrant who has just turned commerce into a science. On the other is the black leader, whom white racists in the South consider a dangerous radical, and black radicals in the North begin to accuse of excessive softness. But they have a common language. This language is efficiency. Washington does not beg for alms. He knows who he is talking to. Rosenwald despises beggars. He considers unsystematic charity throwing money to the wind. Washington puts on the table not photos of starving children, but a business plan. He offers Rosenwald to invest in the future of an entire people, just as he invested in Sears warehouses. The first move in this game was not made on schools, but on dormitories of the Young Men's Christian Association, YMCA. Washington said that black youth fleeing lynchings in the South to cities in the North had nowhere to live. They needed safe harbors. Rosenwald listens and asks one question. How much? The answer is $25,000 for the building. Rosenwald nods, but puts forward a condition that will become the cornerstone of all his subsequent philosophy. It is the challenge strategy. I will give $25,000, says Rosenwald, but only on the condition that the community itself raises another $75,000. This was a shock. Demanding that the poorest segments of the population collect a huge sum seemed like cruel mockery. But Rosenwald saw further. He understood the psychology of ownership. If a person gets something for free, he does not value it. If a person invests his last dollar in construction, he will defend that building with a weapon in his hands. He will feel like a shareholder, not a handout recipient. This was a transfer of the principles of the Sears Corporation to social ground. The experiment worked. The money was raised, and then, inspired by the success, Washington and Rosenwald look at the map of the South. There, where millions of illiterate children live, for whom education officially ends in the 5th grade, if it starts at all. In 1912, in honor of his 50th birthday, Rosenwald makes the first tranche of $25,000 for the Tuskegee Institute, headed by Washington. The goal is to build 6 pilot schools in rural Alabama. At that very moment, while in Alabama they were drawing plans for wooden one-room schools, in the Sears headquarters in Chicago, engineers and architects were working on a project of an entirely different scale. The company was preparing to release its most ambitious product. This was the period after the end of World War I. America was full of money and optimism. People wanted not just to live, they wanted to demonstrate their success. In the architectural department of Sears lay blueprints marked with the code 289. Later, this project would receive the name Magnolia. This was the response of businessman Rosenwald to the demands of white, prospering America. The designers were inspired by Southern plantation mansions. The irony was blinding. Rosenwald's company was selling the dream of life in the style of Gone with the Wind, with columns and verandas symbolizing the old slave-holding South, while Rosenwald himself was secretly funding the destruction of that very South's legacy through the education of black children. Magnolia was not just a house. It was the most complex engineering operation. Sears architects broke the majestic mansion into 30,000 fragments. Every beam was numbered. Every can of paint was calculated to the ounce. This was the pinnacle of standardization. Rosenwald proved that luxury could be industrialized, that an aristocratic lifestyle could be packed into 2 railroad cars and shipped to any point on the continent. In the 1918 catalog, the description of Magnolia occupied a place of honor. The text read, "This house expresses the highest degree of dignity and influence." It had 10 rooms. A huge hall, 3 by 7 meters in size. A dining room capable of seating 20 guests. 4 bedrooms on the 2nd floor, each with a dressing room. A bathroom tiled. A solarium with glass walls. The kit price was nearly $6,000, but including the foundation, plumbing, heating, and builder's work, the total cost easily exceeded $15,000. These were huge sums of money. While the first orders for Magnolia were being processed in Chicago, a tragedy was unfolding in the South that nearly buried the school project. In November 1915, Booker T. Washington dies. The man who was the bridge between Rosenwald and the black community departs. It seemed the alliance would fall apart. Critics said that the rich white Northerner would lose interest in the complex problem without his guide. But Washington's death had the opposite effect. Rosenwald perceived it not as the end of the project, but as a personal obligation. He decides to scale the idea. Instead of 6 schools, he wants to build 600, and then 6,000. He officially creates the Rosenwald Fund in 1917. Here occurs the final merger of two worlds. Rosenwald begins to apply the logistics of Magnolia to school construction. He hires architects who develop standard school designs for 1 teacher, for 2 teachers, for 3. Like the Sears houses, these schools were planned down to the last nail. School plans were printed in booklets distributed among communities. Plan number 1, a school for 1 teacher. Budget, $400 from the fund, the rest from the community and local authorities. Site requirements. Minimum 2 acres of land so children could learn agriculture. Building orientation. Strictly east-west or north-south to maximize natural lighting. Windows had to be high so light would fall over the student's left shoulder without creating shadows when writing. This was the same obsession with details that created Magnolia, only the goal was different. Magnolia created isolation, a fence, private property, the grandeur of solitude. The school created community. To get Rosenwald's money, black farmers who often had no cash gave lumber, labor, land. White school boards, which for years ignored black education, were forced to invest too, because Rosenwald issued an ultimatum. Either you provide part of the money and take the school on your balance sheet, or I give not a cent. He used his dollars as leverage to force the state to fulfill its duties. By the beginning of the 1920s, this mechanism worked like a perfectly tuned machine. Trains from Chicago carried to the South not only materials for luxurious mansions, but also quality standards for poor schools. Rosenwald created a unique situation. He sold elitism to whites and gave dignity to blacks, using the same methods of corporate management. But a conflict was brewing in this scheme. The more successful the schools became, the more they irritated those who wanted to preserve the old order. And Magnolia, the symbol of success, began to turn into a symbol of excess that would soon become unaffordable luxury. The Great Depression was still far off, but the first cracks in the foundation of the American dream had already begun to appear. And Julius Rosenwald, standing at the peak of his power, began to feel that simply building buildings was not enough. It was necessary to change the very consciousness of the people living in those buildings. Let's step inside. Forget about schools and social justice for a minute. To understand the scale of Rosenwald's renunciation, you first need to see the scale of the temptation he created. We are transported to 1922, to South Carolina or Pennsylvania, where one of the 7 daredevils decided to assemble Magnolia. Before you is not just a house. This is a psychological bunker. A facade 24 meters wide. A 2-level portico supported by 4 massive Ionic columns carved from the finest cypress. When you approach this building, you feel small. This is no accident. Sears architects working under Rosenwald knew exactly what they were selling. They were selling power. In a world where most Americans lived in cramped cottages, Magnolia shouted, "The owner of this place has won the game called life." You ascend the wide steps. The entrance door is a heavy slab of oak with beveled mirror glass. You turn the brass handle, cast in Chicago, and enter the hall. This is the first shocking space. There is no functionality here, only theater. The hall area is 25 square meters. To the right is a majestic staircase with birch railings bent by hand. It is created for one purpose: for the mistress of the house to descend to guests during a reception. Turn left. The living room, 8.5 meters long. 3 huge French windows face the facade.
A fireplace faced with brick or marble, depending on the extra payment, can hold 1.5-meter logs. Here it smells of varnish, expensive cigars, and old money, though that money was earned just a year ago. Ceilings nearly 3 meters high create the acoustics of a cathedral. Every sound here has weight. Go further, through the double doors, into the dining room. It is designed for a banquet table for 20 persons. The walls are paneled, imitating 18th century English manners. But if you knock on them, you will hear the sound of American efficiency. This is not century-old oak. This is high-quality pine cut on machines in Illinois with precision to the millimeter. This is an illusion stronger than reality. But the most interesting room is hidden from guests' eyes. This is the kitchen and butler's pantry. Here, Sears architecture reveals its true essence. If the grand halls are an imitation of aristocracy, the kitchen is a hymn to technology. Built-in cabinets, refrigeration chambers, ice delivered separately, ergonomic work surfaces. Magnolia was a hybrid. Outside, the romantic myth of the South. Inside, the industrial machine of the North. And finally, go up to the second floor, the master's bedroom. 23 square meters, a private bathroom with a cast-iron clawfoot tub covered in double-fired enamel. In the early 1920s, having a private bathroom for each bedroom was unheard of luxury. Most Americans still washed in tin basins in the kitchen. In Magnolia, water flowed through pipes hidden in the walls, like blood in the veins of Leviathan. The house had a total of 10 main rooms, not counting utility rooms, the solarium, and balconies. The total area exceeded 370 square meters. Building it required 45 tons of materials. But let's look at the numbers from another angle. The turnkey cost of Magnolia was about $15,000 in 1920 money. The average annual income of a factory worker at that time was $1,500. That is, this house cost 10 years of an ordinary person's life, assuming he wouldn't eat or drink. It was a monument to inequality that could be ordered by mail. Now, keeping this image of luxury in mind, let's move to the house of Julius Rosenwald himself in the Hyde Park district of Chicago. Did he live in something like that? Yes, his house was large, but his attitude toward it was diametrically opposite. For the Magnolia buyer, the house was the goal. For Rosenwald, the house was a tool. In his dining room, which was no smaller than the one we just described, meetings took place that made neighbors' hair stand on end. Imagine this scene. At a table with a white tablecloth sits one of the richest white men in America, and opposite him are black professors, preachers, activists. Booker T. Washington, William Dubois. Servants serve kosher food. In Magnolia, the walls were built to separate the elite from the plebs. In Rosenwald's house, the walls shook from debates about how to dismantle barriers. Magnolia visitors discussed cotton prices and social gossip. Rosenwald's visitors discussed lynchings, lynch courts, and school blueprints. This is where the main architectural paradox of the story lies.
Rosenwald gave America the opportunity to build personal palaces in order to earn money, which he then spent on building public fortresses, schools. Rosenwald's schools were the antithesis of Magnolia. In Magnolia, there were complex corridors and rooms for seclusion. In the schools, there was open plan. Partitions between classrooms were removable. Why? So that in the evening, the school could be turned into a community center for adults. In Magnolia, windows were decoration. In schools, windows were a survival technology. There exists a document, a paint specification for Rosenwald schools. It states, "The interior must be painted in light tones to reflect maximum light, but the lower part of the walls must be dark to hide traces of children's dirty hands." This is a detail of piercing humanity. Rosenwald knew that the children who would come to these schools would have hands in the dirt because they worked in the fields before lessons. In Magnolia, dirty hands were unacceptable. In Rosenwald's schools, they were a sign that the child was trying to break out of the cycle of poverty. By the mid-1920s, Magnolia sales stopped. Only about 7 kits were sold. Why? It was too grandiose even for the Jazz Age. It required too much land, too many servants, too much pomp. It was a dead end in Sears' evolution. And the school project, on the contrary, was gaining momentum. By 1927, the fund celebrated the opening of the 3,000th school. Magnolia was static. It stood as a monument to the owner's egoism. The schools were dynamic. They produced graduates. But it was at this very moment, when the contrast between the dying luxury of Magnolia and the living energy of the schools reached its peak, that a break occurs in Rosenwald's personal life. The man who so meticulously constructed happiness for millions of others faces the fact that his own architectural and life plans begin to crumble under blows of fate. His wife, Augusta Nussbaum, his main moral compass, dies. And Julius Rosenwald, surrounded by his millions and thousands of thank you letters, finds himself in icy solitude in his own huge house. May 23, 1929, Chicago. The Hyde Park mansion plunges into unnatural silence. In the master bedroom, surrounded by the best doctors that money could hire, Augusta Nussbaum Rosenwald dies. She was 60 years old. For Julius, this is not just the loss of a spouse. This is the loss of a navigation system. It is at this moment that the story makes a sharp turn from the architecture of buildings to the architecture of the human soul. To understand the depth of the crisis, one must realize who Augusta was. If Julius was the engine of the Sears empire, Augusta was the brakes holding that machine from falling into the abyss of vanity. It was she who for 40 years blocked any attempts by her husband to live as the Magnolia buyers did. When Rosenwald first got rich and wanted to buy a luxurious fur coat, Augusta refused to wear it. When he proposed building a castle on the North Shore, similar to those built by the Vanderbilts, she said, "We have enough rooms to sleep in and enough tables to eat at. Everything else is a burden." She was the living embodiment of the antithesis of Magnolia. She despised columns and gilding, considering them a mask for inner emptiness. Her death, 5 months before the 1929 stock market crash, exposed to Rosenwald a terrible truth. He had won the capitalist race, but the finish line turned out to be the edge of a cliff. He was left one-on-one with a fortune of $200 million. And here we encounter the deepest moral ambivalence of our hero. Was Julius Rosenwald a saint? No. He was a tough, calculating capitalist. In Sears stores, female workers received the minimum allowable wage. He fought against unions. He was part of a system that exploited labor for efficiency. His philanthropy was, essentially, an attempt to correct the consequences of the very economic model that he himself had perfected. This creates the most complex moral conflict. Can a person who earned money on a harsh sweatshop system atone for it by building schools for the poor? After his wife's death, this conflict intensifies. Rosenwald begins to panic that his money will destroy his own children. He had seen how heirs of other magnates turned into idle sybarites, burning through life in Monte Carlo casinos. He writes, "I would prefer to see my children begging for alms than becoming idlers living off interest." This is a cruel phrase for a loving father, but it shows his obsession.
He did not want to create a dynasty.
Unlike the Magnolia model, which was built for centuries to be passed from father to son, Rosenwald decides that his empire must die with him. In these months of solitude, wandering through his house, he formulates a concept that shocks the philanthropic world. He calls it the dead hand. Rosenwald studies the history of the funds of Benjamin Franklin and Stephen Girard. He sees how money bequeathed 100 years ago for specific purposes lies as dead weight because the world has changed, but the will's conditions remain the same. Funds have turned into bureaucratic monsters whose goal is to preserve capital, not solve problems. "I do not believe in the eternity of donations," he declares. "The generation that created the wealth must spend it on solving the problems of its time." This was a rebellion against the very idea of legacy that Sears sold.
The catalog promised, "Buy this house and your grandchildren will live in it."
Rosenwald said, "Spend it all now. Grandchildren must take care of themselves." But fate prepares another blow for him that will test his philosophy to the breaking point. The house becomes even quieter when the children leave. And then a figure appears in Rosenwald's life who perhaps saves him from complete despair, but at the same time threatens his reputation in high society. We will not speculate on the nature of their relationship, but the facts are, in the last years of his life, he grows close to Adelaide Goodman, his widowed sister-in-law. This causes whispers in Chicago drawing rooms. Society, which forgave him his friendship with blacks, attributing it to the eccentricity of a rich man, could not forgive the violation of family canons. Rosenwald, the man who always controlled his public image, suddenly stops caring about the opinion of the Millionaires Club. His focus shifts to specific people. He begins to save talents. One of the brightest stories of this period is related to Marian Anderson, the great black singer. When she was denied the opportunity to study and perform because of her skin color, it was Rosenwald's fund that intervened. Not just by giving money, but by opening doors. Rosenwald saw in her the same thing he saw in school blueprints: potential strangled by the system. But Rosenwald's personal tragedy was that he was building a future that he himself could not see. He received thousands of letters from children from the schools he built. They wrote on wrapping paper with pencils, "Mr. Rosenwald, thank you for the light. Mr. Rosenwald, now I can read." He read these letters in the evenings, sitting in an armchair in his study. These were his true dividends. But each letter reminded him of the chasm between his world, the world of telephones, cars, and hot water, and the world where having a wooden floor in a school was considered a miracle. By the fall of 1929, Rosenwald feels tired. His heart begins to fail. Doctors recommend rest, but he continues to work. He feels that time is short. He urges the fund managers, "Spend faster." He wants to see results. He allocates huge grants to black colleges, Howard, Fisk, Dillard. He understands that elementary schools are not enough. Elites are needed. Doctors, lawyers, Teachers are needed. And then an event occurs that makes his philosophy not just noble, but prophetic. October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday. The stock exchange crashes. Within a few days, Rosenwald's fortune melts before his eyes. The price of Sears shares falls from $181 to $30. For any other magnate, this would have been the end. For Rosenwald, it becomes a moment of truth.
While his neighbors throw themselves out of skyscraper windows, having lost their fortunes, Rosenwald performs an act that finally separates him from the class of capitalists. He does not save his personal assets. He does something unthinkable. He learns that hundreds of his employees, ordinary clerks and Sears managers, had taken loans secured by company shares to buy houses, possibly even those very magnolias. Now, with the shares crashed, the banks are ready to take everything from them. They will become destitute. Rosenwald calls his lawyer and signs a check. He takes on the debts of his employees. He guarantees their accounts with his own remaining personal money. This is not fund charity. This is a personal gesture. He spends millions of dollars, tens of millions in today's terms, to save people whose names he does not even know from the consequences of the collapse of the system he himself built. At this moment, Magnolia, as a symbol, dies completely. The luxurious mansion is no longer a refuge. In the Great Depression, those survive who have columns? No, those who have community. Rosenwald proved that his real home was not real estate, but people. But this gesture costs him dearly. His health deteriorates rapidly. He enters 1930 not as a mighty titan, but as an old man who sees the world plunging into darkness and tries to light as many matches as he can before his own candle goes out. 1930 arrives. The America we saw at the beginning of our story, the country of confident growth and endless opportunities, ceases to exist. In its place lies ruin. The Great Depression, like acid, eats away at the very fabric of society. And it is here, against the backdrop of national collapse, that the fate of Magnolia and the fate of Rosenwald's legacy finally diverge in opposite directions, creating the most powerful contrast in this drama. Look at those few Magnolia mansions that managed to be built. By the early 1930s, these catalog palaces turn into monuments to unfulfilled hopes. The owners, who yesterday considered themselves elite, cannot pay for heating 10 rooms. Majestic Ionic columns of cypress begin to gray from lack of paint. Drafts blow through luxurious halls because broken windows are boarded up with plywood. There's nothing to replace the glass with. Banks mass repossess these houses for debts. The symbol of success becomes a symbol of burden. The material world, on which the entire career of Merchant Rosenwald was staked, crumbles before his eyes. But in the office in Ravinia, where Julius Rosenwald is fading, the opposite process occurs. The economic crisis becomes a catalyst for the crystallization of meaning. Rosenwald, whose body is weakened by diabetes and heart failure, enters the last, most aggressive phase of his activity. He understands. Brick and wood, even in schools, are not eternal. Racists can burn schools, and this happened. Schools can rot. If magnolias are collapsing, then where is the guarantee that his social project will stand? He needs a new form of investment, indestructible. And he finds it. It is human intellect. In the midst of the economic chaos, when other funds cut budgets and conserve funds, Rosenwald performs a radical transformation of his strategy. He shifts from building walls to building leaders. The fund launches a scholarship program that has no analogues in its scale and boldness.
Rosenwald's logic was simple and ruthless, like a Sears balance sheet. He saw that racial segregation was strangling talents. This was a loss of efficiency. A genius poet worked as a loader. A great biologist mopped floors. Rosenwald decided to give these people what he gave Sears' customers: access. But not to goods, but to time. He bought time for them so they could create, learn, and grow without thinking about a piece of bread. The list of those who received these investments today reads like a pantheon of 20th century American culture. But then, in 1930, these were just names in the fund's card file. Marian Anderson, whose voice would later be called a national treasure. Langston Hughes, the poet who became the voice of the Harlem Renaissance. Ralph Bunche, the future Nobel laureate who would help create the UN. Gordon Parks, the photographer who would show the world the face of real poverty. Rosenwald did not dictate to them what to do. He did not demand an account for every cent. He applied to people the same principle that he applied to his managers: find the best and give them freedom. This was the transcendence of capital. Money turned into art, science, diplomacy. At the same time, Rosenwald enters his last public battle. This was an intellectual battle against the very idea of the eternal fund. In essays published in the Atlantic Monthly and the Saturday Evening Post, he attacks the sacred cow of philanthropy. He writes, "I am against the dead hand of the past controlling the living present." Most magnates of that time, Rockefeller, Carnegie, created funds intended for eternal existence. They wanted their names to live for millennia. Rosenwald called this vanity and folly. He argued that it is impossible to predict the needs of the future. Money set aside to fight diseases of the 19th century is useless in the 20th century. The generation that created the wealth is obligated to spend it on solving the problems of its time, he declares. This causes a storm of indignation. He is called a madman who wants to squander a great legacy. But Rosenwald is unyielding. He amends the charter of his fund with a strict change that legally enshrines his philosophy. The Julius Rosenwald Fund is obligated to spend all its capital, both principal and interest, within 25 years after the founder's death. This was an act of self-destruction for efficiency. He wanted the fund to operate at maximum intensity during the hardest period, not to conserve strength for a hypothetical future. It was like a ship captain ordering all furniture and paneling thrown into the furnace to give the vessel maximum speed in a storm. By the end of 1931, Rosenwald can hardly get out of bed. His world shrinks to the size of the bedroom, but the impact of his decisions expands to the scale of history. Reports come to him: 5,000 schools built, hundreds of scholarship recipients working in laboratories and universities, with 500,000 black children already studying in Rosenwald schools. Every third black child in the South sits at a desk, paid for partly by money from catalog house sales and partly by his parents' calluses. In these last months, another quiet transformation occurs. Rosenwald, a man of numbers, begins to understand the mystical nature of his path. He, the seller turned philanthropist, realizes that his true wealth is not the $200 million that melted away, but the network of hope he wove. The contrast is blinding. Somewhere in North Carolina, a family packs things, leaving the magnolia sold for debts. Their dream of a personal palace shattered by the Great Depression. And in Alabama, in a simple wooden school, a boy opens a book. His school is poor, he has no shoes, but his dream is just beginning. And this dream is paid for by the man dying in Illinois. Rosenwald rethought the very concept of ownership. Magnolia taught, "You are what you own." Schools and scholarships taught, "You are what you give." In December 1931, he gathers his children. He does not talk about business. He talks about responsibility. He leaves them money, but not so much that they could avoid working.
He leaves them a task. His son, Lessing Rosenwald, must head the fund's board and fulfill his father's will, to bring the fund to zero. Close it. Destroy the organization to complete the mission. On January 6, 1932, the denouement arrives. His heart stops. Julius Rosenwald departs. But, unlike pharaohs, he takes nothing with him. He leaves a mechanism that will operate for another 16 years, distributing millions of dollars until exactly zero remains in the account. Rosenwald's death is not the end of the story, but the beginning of its most astonishing phase. The phase when the benefactor's name begins to disappear, to be erased from memory as he wanted, while the seeds he planted begin to bear fruit capable of destroying the system of apartheid in the USA. Magnolia was built to stand forever, but began to crumble in 10 years. The schools were built as temporary shacks, but they created the foundation on which the civil rights movement would stand. Now all that remains is to sum up and see how this paradox resolved in eternity. How the disappearance of memory of Rosenwald himself became proof of his success, and why today, almost 100 years later, we must seek his legacy not in architecture museums, but in the halls of Congress and on the stages of opera houses. In 1948, Lessing Rosenwald signs the last check. The account balance reaches zero. The fund officially announces its self-liquidation. The great machine of philanthropy stops, having fulfilled the Creator's last will. Silence falls. No marble memorials, no eternal endowments, no annual banquets in honor of the founder. The name of Julius Rosenwald begins to slowly dissolve into history, exactly as he planned. Today, if you want to find a Magnolia Mansion, you will have to spend months searching. Of the 7 confirmed specimens, only a few have survived. Most rotted away, burned down, or were demolished by bulldozers for new shopping centers. These palaces, which once cost 10 years of a worker's life, have turned into historical curiosities, cold and empty ghosts of the ambitions of the Gilded Age. But look around. Glance at the political and cultural map of modern America. Medgar Evers, who gave his life for civil rights. Maya Angelou, whose voice became the conscience of the nation. Congressman John Lewis, whose struggle changed the laws of the USA. All of them are children of Rosenwald schools. All of them sat at desks in simple wooden buildings built with money from the sale of catalog goods. The paradox is complete. The man who taught America unrestrained consumption left his greatest legacy through complete renunciation of ownership. Julius Rosenwald did not build himself a bronze monument because he knew a secret inaccessible to the builders of magnolias. The only way to remain in eternity is to become an invisible foundation under the feet of others. Magnolia was merely a beautiful cage for the ego. Rosenwald chose the key. And although we have almost forgotten the name of the one who forged that key, the door he opened can no longer be closed. In the end, history judges us not by what we bought, but by what we gave when it came time to pay the bills.